The door behind them opened again, and a large group of people came in. Professor Dumbledore, followed closely by Mr. Crouch, Professor Karkaroff, Madame Maxime, Professor McGonagall, and Professor Snape. Harry heard the buzzing of the hundreds of students on the other side of the wall before Professor McGonagall closed the door.
"Madame Maxime,"
said Fleur at once, striding over to her headmistress.
"They are saying that this little boy is to compete also?"
Somewhere under Harry's numb disbelief, he felt a ripple of anger. Little boy! Madame Maxime had drawn herself up to her full and considerable height. The top of her handsome head brushed the candle-filled chandelier, and her gigantic black satin bosom swelled.
"What is the meaning of this, Dumbledore?"
she said imperiously.
"I'd rather like to know that myself, Dumbledore," said Professor Karkaroff.
He was wearing a steely smile, and his blue eyes were like chips of ice.
"Two Hogwarts champions. I don't remember anyone telling me the host school is allowed 2 champions. Or have I not read the rules carefully enough?"
He gave a short and nasty laugh.
"C'est impossible,"
said Madame Maxime, whose enormous hand with its many superb opals was resting upon Fleur's shoulder.
"Hogwarts cannot have 2 champions. It is most unjust."
"We were under the impression that your age line would keep out younger contestants, Dumbledore,"
said Karkaroff, his steely smile still in place, though his eyes were colder than ever.
"Otherwise we would, of course, have brought along a wider selection of candidates from our own schools."
"It's no one's fault but Potter's, Karkaroff," said Snape softly. His black eyes were alight with malice. "Don't go blaming Dumbledore for Potter's determination to break rules. He has been crossing lines ever since he arrived here."
"Thank you, Severus,"
said Dumbledore firmly, and Snape went quiet, though his eyes still glinted malevolently through his curtain of greasy black hair. Professor Dumbledore was now looking down at Harry, who looked right back at him, trying to discern the expression of the eyes behind the half-moon spectacles.
"Did you put your name in the Goblet of Fire, Harry?"
Dumbledore asked calmly. "No," said Harry. He was very aware of everybody watching him closely. Snape made a soft noise of impatient disbelief in the shadows.
"Did you ask an older student to put it into the Goblet of Fire for you?"
said Professor Dumbledore, ignoring Snape.
"No,"
said Harry vehemently.
But of course he is lying,"
cried Madame Maxime. Snape was now shaking his head, his lip curling.
"He could not have crossed the age line,"
said Professor McGonagall sharply.
"I am sure we are all agreed upon that." "Dumbledore must have made a mistake with the line,"
said Madame Maxime, shrugging.
"It is possible, of course,"
said Dumbledore politely.
"Dumbledore, you know perfectly well you did not make a mistake,"
said Professor McGonagall angrily.
"Really, what nonsense! Harry could not have crossed the line himself, and as Professor Dumbledore believes that he did not persuade an older student to do it for him, I'm sure that should be good enough for everybody else."
She shot a very angry look at Professor Snape.
"Mr. Crouch, Mr. Bagman,"
said Karkaroff, his voice unctuous once more.
"You are our, objective judges. Surely you will agree that this is most irregular."
Bagman wiped his round, boyish face with his handkerchief and looked at Mr. Crouch, who was standing outside the circle of the firelight, his face half hidden in shadow. He looked slightly eerie, the half-darkness making him look much older, giving him an almost skull-like appearance. When he spoke, however, it was in his usual curt voice.
"We must follow the rules, and the rules state clearly that those people whose names come out of the Goblet of Fire are bound to compete in the tournament." "Well, Barty knows the rule-book back to front,"
said Bagman, beaming and turning back to Karkaroff and Madame Maxime, as though the matter was now closed.
"I insist upon resubmitting the names of the rest of my students,"
said Karkaroff. He had dropped his unctuous tone and his smile now. His face wore a very ugly look indeed.
"You will set up the Goblet of Fire once more, and we will continue adding names until each school has 2 champions. It's only fair, Dumbledore.
But Karkaroff, it doesn't work like that, said Bagman. The Goblet of Fire's just gone out. It won't reignite again until the start of the next tournament.
In which Durmstrang will most certainly not be competing,
exploded Karkaroff.
After all our meetings and negotiations and compromises, I little expected something of this nature to occur. I have half a mind to leave now.
Empty threat, Karkaroff, growled a voice from near the door. You can't leave your champion now. He's got to compete. They've all got to compete. Binding magical contract, like Dumbledore said. Convenient, eh?
Moody had just entered the room. He limped towards the fire, and with every right step he took, there was a loud clunk.
Convenient,
said Karkaroff.
I'm afraid I don't understand you, Moody.
Harry could tell he was trying to sound disdainful, as though what Moody was saying was barely worth his notice. But his hands gave him away. They had balled themselves into fists.
Don't you? Said Moody quietly. It's very simple, Karkaroff. Someone put Potter's name in that goblet, knowing he'd have to compete if it came out.
Evidently, someone who wished to give Hogwarts 2 bites at the apple,
said Madame Maxime.
I quite agree, Madame Maxime,
said Karkaroff, bowing to her.
I shall be lodging complaints with the Ministry of Magic and the International Confederation of Wizards.
If anyone's got reason to complain, it's Potter, growled Moody. But, funny thing, I don't hear him saying a word.
Why should he complain?
Burst out Fleur Delacour, stamping her foot.
He has the chance to compete, hasn't he? We have all been hoping to be chosen for weeks and weeks. The honor for our schools. 1,000 galleons in prize money. This is the chance many would die for.
Maybe someone's hoping Potter is going to die for it,
said Moody, with the merest trace of a growl. An extremely tense silence followed these words. Ludo Bagman, who was looking very anxious indeed, bounced nervously up and down on his feet and said,
Moody, old man, what a thing to say!
We all know Professor Moody considers the morning wasted if he hasn't discovered 6 plots to murder him before lunchtime, said Karkaroff loudly. Apparently he is now teaching his students to fear assassination too. An odd quality in a defense against the dark arts teacher, Dumbledore. But no doubt you had your reasons.
Imagining things, am I? Growled Moody. Seeing things, eh? It was a skilled witcher wizard who put the boy's name in that goblet.
Ah, what evidence is there of that?
Said Madame Maxime, throwing up her huge hands.
Because they hoodwinked a very powerful magical object, said Moody. It would have needed an exceptionally strong confundus charm to bamboozle that goblet into forgetting that only 3 schools compete in the tournament. I'm guessing they submitted Potter's name under a 4th school to make sure he was the only one in his category.
You seem to have given this a great deal of thought, Moody, said Karkaroff coldly. And a very ingenious theory it is. Though, of course, I heard you recently got it into your head that one of your birthday presents contained a cunningly disguised basilisk egg and smashed it to pieces before realizing it was a carriage clock. So you'll understand if we don't take you entirely seriously.
There are those who'll turn innocent occasions to their advantage,
Moody retorted in a menacing voice.
It's my job to think the way dark wizards do, Karkaroff, as you ought to remember.
Alastor,
said Dumbledore warningly. Harry wondered for a moment whom he was speaking to, but then realized Mad-Eye could hardly be Moody's real first name. Moody fell silent, though still surveying Karkaroff with satisfaction. Karkaroff's face was burning.
How this situation arose, we do not know, said Dumbledore, speaking to everyone gathered in the room. It seems to me, however, that we have no choice but to accept it. Both Cedric and Harry have been chosen to compete in the tournament. This, therefore, they will do.
Ah, but Dumbledore...
My dear Madame Maxime, if you have an alternative, I would be delighted to hear it.
Dumbledore waited, but Madame Maxime did not speak. She merely glared. She wasn't the only one either. Snape looked furious. Karkaroff livid. Bagman, however, looked rather excited.
Well, shall we crack on then?
He said, rubbing his hands together and smiling around the room.
Got to give our champions their instructions, haven't we? Barty, want to do the honors?
Mr. Crouch seemed to come out of a deep reverie.
Yes,
he said.
Instructions. Yes, the first task.
He moved forwards into the firelight. Close to, Harry thought he looked ill. There were dark shadows beneath his eyes, and a thin, papery look about his wrinkled skin that had not been there at the Quidditch World Cup.
The first task is designed to test your daring,
he told Harry, Cedric, Fleur, and Crumb.
So we are not going to be telling you what it is. Courage in the face of the unknown is an important quality in a wizard, very important. The first task will take place on November the 24th in front of the other students and the panel of judges. The champions are not permitted to ask for or accept help of any kind from their teachers to complete the tasks in the tournament. The champions will face the first challenge armed only with their wands. They will receive information about the second task when the first is over. Owing to the demanding and time-consuming nature of the tournament, the champions are exempted from end-of-year tests.
Mr. Crouch turned to look at Dumbledore.
I think that's all, is it, Albus?
I think so, said Dumbledore, who was looking at Mr. Crouch with mild concern.
Are you sure you wouldn't like to stay at Hogwarts tonight, Barty? No, Dumbledore, I must get back to the Ministry,
said Mr. Crouch.
It is a very busy, very difficult time at the moment. I've left young Weatherby in charge, very enthusiastic, a little over-enthusiastic, if truth be told. You'll come and have a drink before you go, at least, said Dumbledore. Come on, Barty, I'm staying, said Bagman brightly. It's all happening at Hogwarts now, you know. Much more exciting here than at the office. I think not, Ludo, said Crouch, with a touch of his old impatience. Professor Karkaroff, Madame Maxime, a nightcap, said Dumbledore.
But Madame Maxime had already put her arm around Fleur's shoulders and was leading her swiftly out of the room. Harry could hear them both talking very fast in French as they went off into the great hall. Karkaroff beckoned to Crumb, and they too exited, though in silence.
Harry, Cedric, I suggest you go up to bed, said Dumbledore, smiling at both of them. I am sure Gryffindor and Hufflepuff are waiting to celebrate with you, and it would be a shame to deprive them of this excellent excuse to make a great deal of mess and noise.
Harry glanced at Cedric, who nodded, and they left together.